If you've ever thought of quilting your own projects but just don't know where to start, I have the perfect first steps for you. I've put together a PDF guide. I call it 3 Steps Toward Freehand Freedom. These are the baby steps, but they can help you move past your overwhelm and show you that yes, indeed, freehand quilting can be learned. So if you'd like to snag this PDF, there's a link in the show notes, or if you're an Instagram user, just message me 3 steps. That's the number 3 STEPS, and I'll send you that link. Let today be the day you get started.
Growing up, I always had these women that I admired, right? These figures that you look up to and you say, where do they get this driving force to be fully themselves?
Welcome to Measure Twice, Cut Once, the podcast where we talk all things quilting, hear quilters and other crafters' stories, and draw encouragement and even life lessons from them. I'm your host, Susan Smith, coming to you from my quilting studio, Stitched by Susan. This is where my long arm Lucy and I spend lots of hours doing freehand, edge-to-edge quilting. If you're not a quilter, and those terms mean nothing to you, it's basically doodling on the layers of a quilt top with a 50-pound pencil, with needle and thread attached, and at very high speed. This week, I've been working on a quilt of valor and also doing a fair bit of live streaming, which kind of in my mind is a gamer's paradise, but it turns out there are quilters who enjoy live streaming too. I'm very much an introvert, so it's kind of been a surprise to me to find that I thoroughly enjoy doing these interactive broadcasts. In them, I'm usually quilting a full project in real time, so with no editing, from beginning to end. So all the thread breaks and the oopses are included. Plus, viewers are able to ask questions and even vote on choices. So it becomes this very satisfying quilting bee sort of event. So if you're interested in viewing some, check out my Facebook page or my YouTube channel, Stitched by Susan, and some of the replays can be viewed there. Today, I'm welcoming into my studio Verushka Zarate, foundation paper piecer extraordinaire. She is inspired by remarkable humans to create their portrait in fabric. And these portraits have got to be seen to be believed. But today I invite you to join us as she gives us a closer look at her inspiration and process as an artist. Today's Pins and Needles is brought to you by The Will and Dave Show.
Hi, I'm the Will half of The Will and Dave Show, a short little podcast that myself and the eponymous Dave like to record talking about the things that really matter to us, whether that's social, political, or pop culture. Usually we don't see eye to eye, but more often than not, we can find some common ground in there somewhere. And now, back to Pins and Needles with a quick tip for all you sharp quilters out there.
Everyone needs a spa day, including your sewing machine. Here's how I schedule regular small maintenance for my sewing machine. I pre-fill bobbins, and I typically do my piecing with the same kind of neutral tan color. So I pre-fill 6 or 7 bobbins, and when I've used up those bobbins, that's my trigger. It's time for a spa moment. So I pause, unload the bobbin, pull out the whole bobbin casing assembly, and give my machine a good cleaning from lint. So I like to use just a child's crafty paintbrush, a fairly small one, and the fuzzier and more worn out it is, the better. And I use that brush to reach absolutely every mechanical area of my machine, and it kind of grabs and picks up and pulls together all the lint that's in there. If your brush isn't pulling it all out, you might need a pair of tweezers. If you have a pair of angled tweezers, they're excellent for grabbing those little dust bunnies and pulling them out. I was once talking to the guy who does the maintenance on my sewing machine, and he said that the absolute number one problem he sees with sewing machines is a huge overgrowth of lint, sometimes so bad that it's compacted like a brick in there. So this one tip will save you in having your machine repaired and cleaned. So just clean that lint out at the end of every 6 bobbins, put the bobbin casing back in and the throat plate of the machine back on, and you're ready to go again. Wind 6 more bobbins and you're reset for the next time. You all know I love my coffee. And if you're interested in supporting this podcast, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/StitchedBySusan, where for the price of one delicious coffee, you're able to make a one-time contribution. This helps me keep batteries in stock for my microphone and enables me to keep bringing you these weekly episodes. Thanks so much for your support, and maybe take a moment now to refill your cup as you settle back to enjoy today's interview. So without further ado, I am welcoming Verushka into my studio today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Susan. Thank you for having me.
I first found your work on Instagram, and it is over the top. I don't even have adjectives to describe. It has to be seen to be believed. But of course, we can't show our listeners today. So tell us what it is that you are currently working on and what you're becoming well known for.
Yeah, so it's so interesting you talk about finding me on Instagram, because I actually started my quilting Instagram page maybe last August, because I was posting on my personal page how to do a 1/4-inch seam, or this is how and my cousins and my friends and family were like, what is this all about? So I thought, what started as an experiment to just kind of share what I was doing as a hobby on Instagram really took a life of its own, and has been such a rewarding experience, the response I've gotten from folks that are seeing what I'm doing. So I started sewing after I had my 2 little boys. That was around 14, maybe 17, 18. Primarily because it's a funny story. I started accumulating all of these baby clothes, and I didn't know what to do with them. And my husband one day says to me, Verushka, what are you going to do with these boxes and boxes of baby clothes? Because to me, I don't know how it is for you, Susan, but to me, I felt like these clothes had memories and meaning in them. And I felt like if I just gave them away, they would just be baby clothes to someone else, right?
True.
But to me, they were imbued with memory. And so I thought, I cannot give these away, but I need to do something. So I went online and, Googled what to do with fabric. And that's when I happened on quilting. Now, at the time, I didn't know how to sew. I didn't own a sewing machine. I had taken a sewing class in high school. I was not at all knowledgeable in sewing. And so I mentioned to my husband, maybe I can do a quilt for my children. And my sweet husband got me a QVC sewing machine, my very first Mother's Day. Now, At the time, I only had a newborn and a 1-year-old, so I didn't even open it until a year later. And the poor machine out of the box didn't work. So that was another 6 months. But once I started learning about quilting online on YouTube, I took like a duck to water. I felt there was something about this that just, I enjoyed every single process of it, from learning about notions to learning about machines to learning about technique. And that's where I started kind of sharing, little tidbits on Instagram. But then where it really blew up was when I started doing my original art quilts using foundation paper piecing. That's when things last August, September really just exploded exponentially.
And that would be about the time that I first saw you. And your artwork is so incredibly unique. I've been in the quilting industry for a little while, and I've seen nothing like it. So what gave you that idea? Was it just a bright moment idea, or did it grow out of doing other things?
That's a really great question. In my other life, pre-children, I went to graduate school professionally. I was a therapist, a counselor, worked at University of California in their counseling psych department. And so most of my life has been about uplifting and, empowering, inspiring others. And so I really have a heart for that. I really have a heart for things that are uplifting, things that inspire. And in my own life, I love reading, listening to biographies of people who have somehow in their journey used their voice unapologetically for the sake of good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so even growing up as a first generation American, there were stories that I was told of people that, were bold, who had no worries in using their own voice for the betterment of the world, right? And at times they were persecuted for it. But one of the people that have always inspired me, in particular women, has been Frida Kahlo since I was a little girl. And most people, it was so funny. Maybe about a year ago, I was walking through a quilt show. Once I got into quilting, I was barely learning, and I heard someone say, all of a sudden this Frida is so popular. And I thought, and I kind of spoke up and I said, well, she's been popular for a long time. But for many, I think in the United States, not as much. But, Frida Kahlo is, a woman who lived many, many years ago in the 30s and 40s, who was half German, half Mexican indigenous, who held political views that were controversial. She was a communist. She was polyamorous. She was handicapped. She was an artist who used, scenes that were typically not thought of as effeminate, right? So there were a lot of skulls and hearts, and that was because actually she wanted to be a physician. But back in the day, women weren't allowed to be doctors, right? So she would imbue all of these really at the time non-fancy things, right? Non-popular things into her being, and was unapologetically herself. And so, her artwork nowadays is like unlike anything we've seen. It's thought-provoking. So I was always drawn to these amazing women, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, how do you go through law school, being a mom, fighting the gender norms in our society? So growing up, I always had these women that I admired, right? Mm-hmm. These figures that you look up to and you say, how, where do they get this driving force to be fully themselves? And so when I fell in love with foundation paper piecing, well, quilting first, and then when I found foundation paper piecing, I was like, this is my jam. I mean, the thing about foundation paper piecing is this regarding designing subjects, the sky's the limits, really. So when I started really exploring and studying how to make my own designs, my own things, I thought, well, if I'm going to spend this much time designing something and then making something, what is something that I really love? Like, what is something that inspires me, right? And I had seen a lot of really wonderful motifs of animals or, trees, plants, flowers. But there was nothing, really wonderful things. But there was nothing really that was like really tugging at my spirit. And I thought, well, you know what? Let me give it a go in trying to, design people that inspire me, things that inspire me. So like I have now, almost like 9 months into it, I have, sort of like these two avenues of patterns that I've made. One are these portraits of folks that inspire me and are incredible human beings. And the other are patterns that kind of hint to, the uplifting and empowerment of women in general. And yeah.
Can I ask what your first portrait was and how that went for you? Was it an exploratory process, or did that come easily since you had already been foundation paper piecing?
So the first portrait that I made on my own, because there was the first portrait I didn't know how to make foundation paper piecing. I kind of collaborated with someone who was a pattern designer to make Frida, but it really didn't turn out. It didn't turn out in the way that I was hoping. So that's when I was like, you know what? I need to figure this out on my own. And I had taken some graphic design courses in the past at, just community college, because I've always been interested in art and design. Um, but I said, I need to figure this out on my own. And so the first pattern that I ever designed, now I look back at it and I laugh, because I've learned so much from that first pattern, because there's a difference between designing something and it looks okay and you're like, yes, this will work, to actually sewing it up. Those are two different worlds.
True.
You can have a wonderful concept, a wonderful subject, even drafted on the computer on Illustrator, and you're like, yes, this will work. But when you take that to executing it, it's two different worlds. And that's exactly what happened. My very first was an Audrey Hepburn, who's another incredible human being that I've admired since I was a little girl. My mother actually learned English listening to her movies as a child. And so, Audrey Hepburn too, this person who grew up in World War II Europe, who suffered starvation, was kind of helped out of that as a child through UN Child Services. And so after she becomes this huge movie star, she goes back and becomes one of the first movie stars, if you will, celebrities, to give back to children who are suffering poverty and a war and famine. And she starts bringing to light these issues. Now, this was in a time where it wasn't as popular as it is now, which I'm glad it is now. So at the time, it was kind of like, okay, that's kind of dirty work.
She was very groundbreaking, for sure, in her humanitarian efforts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and especially from someone coming from that echelon, right? I mean, in the United States, we don't have royalty, but movie stars are as close to royalty, I think, as we get. So yeah, she's someone who I thought was just phenomenal. And so I set out to design a pattern of hers, and I learned a ton off of that first design. So she was the first person I ever attempted to tackle.
So amazing. And in looking at your photographs, looking at your earlier portraits, it seemed like your colors were a little more subdued, maybe. And you have this very interesting, very vibrant palette that you use now. That obviously developed over time too?
Yeah. So where that came from was after Audrey, 2020 happened, right? And there was a lot, how would I put it? There was a lot being brought to light, right? All of these issues of social justice issues. All of a sudden we have the pandemic. We have issues of isolation and people losing their jobs. And there was a lot going on. And here in California, it was very palpable. I mean, we had riots and protests and people, wanting to adjust the system, right?
Right.
And a lot was happening in our family as well. Had, my grandmother dies of COVID. There was just a lot happening. And, after my kids would go to bed, my little boys would go to bed, is when I would come to my little sewing nook here and sew. And I thought, I need to make something to lift my spirits. And so another person that I absolutely admire and I'm in awe of is Martin Luther King Jr. And I thought, well, let me tackle doing an MLK portrait. This was just for me to kind of like process my own stuff. And the whole idea for me was, how do because with Audrey, I had really attempted to do natural color fabrics, right? If you see her face, it's tones of cream and tans.
Right.
And I actually found it to be more difficult to do a quilt portrait trying to use natural tones.
Interesting.
I think it's because, Susan, like your eye automatically is like, no, Verushka, those are not the real colors. I see what you're trying to do here, but it works, but it doesn't, right? And so I knew with MLK, I was like, well, I'd been inspired by the work of Biza Butler, right? Who uses these contrasting tones. She does this applique, beautiful portraits of African Americans in like the 20s and 1910s. And I thought, well, what if I use representative colors? And I had seen other portraits who kind of do the same effect, right? So you do different shades of color to represent certain things.
So it strikes me, when I look at your pictures, it strikes me like using some kind of photo app to do like a duo type color, right? And it just almost limits that palette into a particular channel. And then your eye just reads it and interprets it. It's amazing.
Yeah. So with MLK, it's not actually done on an app. It's actually on Illustrator that the photo is adjusted. You push them to black and white, and then you with the color palette with MLK, there was almost like 270 shades, different shades.
Oh my goodness.
And so I knew with him, I wanted this kind of transition between dark to light, right? To sort of represent this idea of, bringing light to darkness, justice to injustice, and so I knew I wanted tones of blue and navy, and then tones of whites and yellows and pinks for the light. And I think it turned out great. And that's actually where things started kind of evolving for me in the quilting world, because people were like, hey, how did you do this? I usually see this in applique form. How are you doing it in foundation paper piecing? But what I personally learned from my Emma quilt portrait, I was using too many colors. I mean, it looks wonderful. I mean, more colors can really but it was a little too hard to manage that many colors because number one, fabric is expensive, right? I mean, like a yard of printed fabric is about, $11, $12. And it as it should be, right? Because a lot of work goes into that. But it was just too many colors. And so I knew early on I needed to develop a palette. And I thought, well, maybe that helps with branding too, because if I develop a palette, this is Verushka's palette, her patterns, you can kind of identify someone's work. So it was more out of a practical matter. And then it ended up really working out because
it is certainly effective. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It also helps to I work better when I have constraints sometimes, right? Because I know all the highlights of the face are in tones of white and light yellow, and then a goldenrod yellow, and then a coral. So in my mind now, I know where the colors fit in for representation. So it actually, what started as, well, this is just too overwhelming, I don't have the time to put in that many colors to every single piece I want to do, actually ended up really facilitating the process.
That's great. So just from a purely practical standpoint, so full confession time, I'm not really a foundation paper piecing. I can probably count on one hand the number of projects that I've attempted, and they're all ultra simple compared to yours. Like, where does one start? So I know that you offer patterns for sale. Where do you recommend that someone starts? Like maybe which of your patterns might they use, and which of your YouTube or instructional videos might they want to watch first to know if this is something they want to do and to get started?
Yeah, so wonderful question. What's been so interesting, Susan, is I've been talking to quilt guilds and people that have been doing quilting for, 20, 30 years. And I often find this hesitancy with foundation paper piecing, almost like this it scares me, or I tried it and it didn't work out.
I totally get that, because it's difficult. It's a totally different skill than your typical matching seams pressing to one side or pressing open kind of thing. And it seems very intricate and daunting.
Yeah. Well, I just have so many thoughts on that. The thing about foundation paper piecing is, for those who don't know, foundation paper piecing is basically the pattern is on a piece of paper, right?
The lines are all drawn, basically.
And the lines are all drawn. So it's, where to sew, where the fabric goes. It's kind of like, paint by numbers. It's kind of like sewing by numbers. The tricky part is that you're working from behind, right? Like all sewing, you work from behind. But there's a sequencing to foundation paper piecing that most folks in the beginning have a hard time, like, well, how does it work? And so when I started foundation paper piecing, Susan, there wasn't a lot online. And I happened on FPP because I was stuck on wanting to do a unicorn quilt block. And I had looked online for different things, and I found some pieced patterns, but then I found this other pattern that really called to me. Now, when I purchased it, I had no idea it was foundation paper piecing, first of all. And second, I had no idea what foundation paper piecing was. And so, like I did, I, would go to a YouTube university. I would, being a good graduate student, I would do a lot of research online, right? And there wasn't a lot online. And so I learned the hard way. Like, I learned the way that people shouldn't learn, because for me, what got me through it was just tenacity. I was like, I'm going to finish this block. I started it. I started something, I'm going to finish it. And so when I finally got the hang of it, I was like, okay, first of all, this is a lot easier than I thought it was. I just need, if I would have talked to myself 3 months ago, I would have saved myself a lot of heartache and a lot of time with the seam ripper. So that's when I thought, you know what? I've been given so much from learning online for free from folks who have offered of themselves, who have said, hey, this was the heartache that I went through to learn this. Look, you shouldn't have to go through that. You don't have to go through that. It's this easy. Bam, bam, bam. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to make a pattern. And there's a pattern on my Etsy called Fashion Statement. It's a woman in a hat. And I thought, I'm going to make a video series of how to foundation paper piece from start to finish. Like, no tips, no tricks are held back. And so I talk about how to print out the pattern, like different sections of how do you read a pattern in the foundation paper piecing? Because it's a little different, right?
It is.
Because with regular quilting, you have instructions to first cut. Mm-hmm. So quilting, traditional piecing is cutting, then sewing, then ironing, and then you put it all together, right?
Right.
Foundation paper piecing is a little different in that you have to do all of that every step of the way. So every shape you have to cut, sew, iron, and then you do it again. So the cycle is much more repetitive. In traditional piecing, you do all the cutting at once. So that takes, a good 3-4 hours to do. And then so it's kind of like divided up into smaller little sections.
Right.
So I talk about, how the world of FPP, how does a pattern look like? What are the tools that you can use? What is the trick to foundation paper piecing? Because once you get the rhythm, you can do any FPP. I get asked a lot, Susan, like, what's the easiest FPP pattern you have? And what's the hardest? That's an interesting question. It's kind of funny because the truth is that doesn't exist.
Well, obviously it comes from a person like me who says the fewer the seams and the fewer the colors, that must be the easiest, right?
Right, exactly. But in fact, what it is, it's the quickest. So it's more a question of, if you have a simpler pattern, you're going to finish it quicker. But it's exactly the same rhythms and the same technique for a larger, more intricate piece. So, yeah, I set out to do a complete video series to help folks learn foundation paper piecing as a technique, because you shouldn't have to have the heartache of learning through trial and error like I did. It's totally unnecessary.
So is that series available on your YouTube channel?
It is, and it's totally free.
So tell us where to go for that. Tell me where to go for that. I need help.
Yeah. So it's on Pride and Joy Quilting, and there are so I do have lots of little tips and tricks, like, how to create super flat seams, how to reduce bulk. Like, they're just like 1 minute or 2 minute videos. And then there's the complete series, which is like 12 videos, several hours. And I basically walk you through that entire pattern. And then as we sew it up, I kind of talk about how do I think about this? And when I did that pattern, I wanted to tackle all of the elements that I use in my patterns, right? Like, for example, how to manage large single sections, how to tackle joining sections,
and that's often where a lot of the bulk is, right? So a couple of the videos that I watched dealt with how to handle those bulky seams and where to go with that excess fabric.
Yeah, because with detailed pieces, more detail means more pieces, right? Or more shapes.
And more seam allowances.
Exactly, which means more seam allowances. So the more detailed a piece, the more I find I need to tackle bulk.
Have methods for dealing
Which,
with it. Yeah.
yeah, which is one of the challenges that I have when I'm designing. So when I'm designing, I'm intentionally looking at where do I place these lines in a way that when I actually go to sew it, the bulk will be dispersed.
So give
So
me,
that
if you can, in a few sentences, paragraph or less, can you give me like a little flow chart kind of your method? So you've found the inspiration, the person that you want to create a portrait of. What's next?
So what's next is I take my color palette and I kind of place it where I think it goes. And then the longest and the most tedious part is the drafting part. Because, for example, I'm working right now on a portrait that I'm hoping to release of Joan of Arc holding a lightsaber.
Of
And
course.
I have drafted her maybe 3 or 4 times
So
because
you've got the idea in mind and the outlines, for lack of a better word. Do you do color next, or do you do, think about where those seam lines will fall, as you were talking about a minute ago, the sectioning of it?
that's a really it's all happening at the same time. And actually, I've gotten so many inquiries online on how to do it that I've been starting to think of how to do a workshop. And sometimes I feel overwhelmed by it because number one, time with 2 little boys. Doing anything is epic. Like right now, doing this podcast, my husband's on the way from a meeting. They're watching. I'm like, okay, I have a meeting. I'll be right back. Come get me if there's an emergency. So having time is the hardest part. But as I envision, like, how do you teach this? It's hard to compartmentalize some things so that it makes sense, right? Going from my brain so that it makes sense to someone else. The truth is that things are happening simultaneous. Like I'll draw a line, I'll adjust colors, and then that won't work. And so I'll readjust, trying to look at shadowing, trying to look at highlights. So it's all happening simultaneously. And then it'll be done, right, I think. And then I'll look back through it through a fine tooth comb and I'm like, I need to rethink this. I need to rethink that. My biggest challenge when I'm drafting is, as a sewist, right, as someone who sews, trying to get my foundation paper pieces as large as possible. So what that means is, how do I make an individual paper piece have as many of the shapes necessary without joining it to the next paper piece?
Okay.
That's what makes it harder, actually. The more joining of seams you have, the more possibility for inaccuracy, right? Because then all of a sudden the seams won't, like the points won't join or they won't be perfect.
And then
So
your
like I
line of
have this
sight is
pattern.
kind of messed up.
Yeah, like you're like, oh, those points didn't match. So I actually have one pattern on my Etsy that's a eye, and it's completely customizable. Like you can change the color of the eyeshadow and the eyebrow and the eyeball, but the entire piece pattern is one foundation paper piece. There's no joining in it. And so I love that. And it's a real challenge to me. Like, how do I make this pattern as complex as possible with as few pieces as possible? So that's what I'm constantly challenging myself with. And I find that people that are learning are finding it easier to do FPP because of that. So that's kind of rewarding too.
Absolutely. So I have to come back to one thing. You were mentioning, your boys and trying to do this podcast recording even and keep the boys occupied. So I've been listening to some of your YouTube videos, and I got to say, like, for anyone listening, if you want a quick pick-me-up, listen to those videos. And the energy and joy of those little boys in the background is fantastic. I absolutely love it.
Oh, thank you, Susan. One of the things that I'm grateful for 2020 about is like people are okay with kids' noises in the backdrop because they're like, oh, I get it now.
I think so too, because so many
you.
people have had to start to do their work from home and on Zoom meetings and so forth, and everyone's gotten very, I don't know if relaxed is the right word, but more understanding about it. We don't have to be so formal as we once were. So, yay.
Yeah, there's definitely empathy. Like they know, oh, I know what that's like, right? At least
Yeah.
for people that have children.
And quite honestly,
My baby.
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, no, no.
I was just going to say, it makes businesses more approachable when you see that personal side. There's a number of podcasts that I listen to, and they kind of always have a disclaimer at the beginning, and it's done really well. But, you might hear life in the background. You might hear my cat or my dog or my kids. And I like that. That just makes it so much more personal.
Yeah, and my baby boys are, they're the inspiration really of all of this. Pride and joy, quilting is them. They're my pride and joy. My logo is them. They're the ones that inspired me to learn something new. So a lot of the reason why you hear their laughter or they're complaining or they're calling me in the backdrop is because my sewing space, we rearranged things so that my sewing space is right where their homeschool hangout space is, because I want them to, I want to hang out with them. I want them to hang out with me. And they're constantly coming in and saying, Mommy, can I help you? So they actually take out the foundation paper piece, the papers at the end. Yep. They love to take out the pins. So I want them to feel like they're welcome into my space, at all times. And so, sometimes they take advantage of it, and that's fine with me. I tell them, you can always come and interrupt Mommy when, for a hug or a kiss. But the truth is, now as a stay-at-home mom, because I left working to be able to raise them, to homeschool them, I get asked a lot, how do you find the time to do this? And the truth is, now that they're 6 and 7, they can, often when they're doing independent play or they're doing the computer component of their homeschool, because they have book and computer, I'll just sneak away for 10 or 20 minutes and I'll do like one little section, or, they're swimming and I'll come in and I'll spend half an hour. So, there's no balance really. It's just trying to find, it's not like, well, this is my time frame and I sew from 10 to 12. Not at all. It's kind of this fluid thing where, hey, I got a lot of sewing done today while daddy took the kids to the park, to, oh, hey, it's been a few days, I haven't had a chance.
Yeah, being a mom you don't usually have that luxury of dedicated craft time, but I notice we always seem to find a way, don't we?
Right, exactly.
So, tell me a little bit about your current stellar project that you're working on, or at least it looks current based on your Instagram posts.
Yes, so it's my biggest piece to date. It's 70 by 70. I need to count and see how many shapes are in it. But it's definitely the most detailed piece I've done. It's the largest. It's still using the same color palette, so less than 20 colors. But it's a self-portrait of me with my 2 boys and my pride and joy, right? And I thought, oh, pride and joy quilting. So I finished my little boy first, and then I finished my firstborn, and now I got to work on my mug, which is the one I'm avoiding the most in my self-portrait. But the idea came from, I'm doing all these faces of folks, and it takes so much time to get the images, the drafting right. I thought, well, why don't I take this time to do with me and my boys? And my poor husband was like, where am I in the... And I'm like, well, it's supposed to be a self-portrait. And it just kind of became with the boys because pride and joy quilting. So I I felt so bad. I thought, I'll do a family portrait sometime in the future. I'll just do one for you. But it's a self-portrait of me and my boys. And it's a big one. I'm already nervous about how to quilt it because typically my pieces are smaller. The largest I do is 40 by 40. And that's for a lot of reasons. Mostly it's just more manageable. The larger you get, the harder it is to manage something, right? As we know as quilters. Mm-hmm. So I only do 40 by 40, and I tended to just mount them on a canvas because my pieces are so detailed that I've wondered if I quilt over them, if it'll take away. But this piece, I'm definitely going to have to quilt. You can't mount a 70 by 70, right? So I'm nervous about how it will be quilted, but
So how
You know,
have you
there are,
quilted some in the past? I'm a long arm quilter myself, so that was one of my burning questions is how do you quilt them and how do you keep that from detracting and rather play up the features in the photo, in the portrait?
that's a great, so I will confess, I am not a long arm quilter. Like my thing is piecing. So I'm like a novice when it comes to quilting. You know, I wish I had the gift of being able to like visually look at, you know, this, how to do more complex quilting on my pieces. But right now I do straight line sewing. And it's fine because I feel like there's so much detail already in the piecing that if I was to overcomplicate it with the quilting, that it might distract.
I actually agree with you.
But
I often resort to straight line quilting just because it doesn't distract from the project, the colors, the design, whatever the visual impact is. So yeah, don't feel badly about that at all. That's awesome.
thanks. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I finally finished this piece. I wish I could do like a kick butt quilting, but it is what it is, right? It's all for fun. We do the best we can with the tool sets that we have at the time.
It would be fun, just an idea, and I'm just off the cuff here. It would be fun
Please.
sometime down the road to do like the textile portion. So maybe the jacket that someone is wearing with an awesome quilted design. So, you know, hit me up for that down the road.
You know what? I'll send it your way and you can kind of do some drawings on and be like, Verushka, this is how I would do, because Susan, I'm already nervous about the quilting part. I'm like, I got the piecing part. It's the quilting part. When I finish my self-portrait, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, and sometimes it doesn't hurt to, you know, have things percolate for a little while and ideas come to you over time too.
Yeah.
So. Well, this has been a real pleasure. I cannot wait to see what you do next. So
thank you so much, Susan.
Thanks ever so much for joining me. Do you want to tell people briefly, I know we mentioned your YouTube channel, but tell people briefly where you can be found and where they can see some of your beautiful art. And I will also include links in the show notes too.
Yeah, my YouTube channel that's full of, tips and tricks on how to do foundation paper piecing is Pride and Joy Quilting. I do have a foundation paper piecing private group on Facebook that folks are free to join and kind of have a safe place to share their questions or their progress with foundation paper piecing. But most of my platform, I would say, is on Instagram. That's where I share pictures and videos and things as such. And I think kind of reflecting, if there's one thing I want folks to take away from listening to this, if they didn't log off by now, I hope they didn't, is, don't be afraid to try something new. If someone would have told me a year ago that what I was doing as a hobby would resonate with folks, I would have said, no way, like that's a dream come true. And in many ways, I feel like this is a dream come true because I took the risk of trying something new. So if you find, that, you've been doing a certain type of quilting for a long period of time and are wondering, hey, maybe I need to try something different, give it a go, whether it's applique or English paper piecing or foundation paper piecing, or maybe you've done all of that and you're curious about, well, how do I design my own things? Take that first step because you might surprise yourself. And you might find that there are different areas within your personhood that will begin to flourish and blossom because you took that step. So I want to encourage whoever is listening to challenge themselves to try something new and unexpected because, there might be some really cool things down the line.
Excellent advice. That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider taking a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcast or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other listeners to find the show so they can hear these stories too. For information on the classes I offer or quilting services, please see my website, StitchedBySusan.com. If you're a long-arm quilter and looking for freehand tips, take advantage of the live and unscripted events hosted on my Facebook page and replayed on my YouTube channel, Stitched by Susan. And if pictures are your preference, check out my Pinterest galleries of edge-to-edge and custom quilting projects. These direct links can all be found in the show notes below. So, until next time, may your sorrows be patched and your joys be quilted.